This video is sponsored by MPB. More on them in a bit. One of the things I love so much about photography is when you walk away from a shoot knowing you just captured some incredible photos. And you can't wait to just get home and start editing some of those images. But of course, like anything in life, that doesn't always go to plan. I just got back from a month-long trip in Europe, and I spent one of those weeks road tripping throughout Ireland with one of my buddies, capturing a ton of photos with the Fuji X100v. And it was an awesome trip. Ireland was incredibly beautiful, and I captured a ton of photos over the 5 days that we were driving throughout Ireland. But once I got home and I started taking a look at some of the photos, to be honest, I kind of hated them. Now, I don't know if that's because it was pretty overcast on most of the trip or because the landscapes were just a bit too expansive for the 35mm lens, but I just really wasn't feeling most of the images that I shot out there. And to be honest, this left me feeling pretty discouraged. You know, I was really excited about this trip. I had all these ideas and I went out and I thought that I executed them, but once I came home, they just weren't meeting my potential. And I've been brewing over these shots for a few weeks now, looking back every few days, hoping to see something, and I just never really saw something that was compelling to me. But this whole process got me thinking, and the other day I finally came to the realization that, you know, I didn't buy this camera to capture epic images or Insta-worthy photos in the first place. I bought this camera to document the people around me, my friends, my experiences, the things that I'm doing on a daily basis. I bought this camera to document my life. The Fuji X100v is an amazing camera and it takes absolutely epic photos, but I think what makes this camera so great is its ability to document your day-to-day life in an unobtrusive way. And in a way that's enjoyable and doesn't feel like work as opposed to shooting with my Sony or one of my other professional cameras. And because of that, I take way more photos with my Fuji than I do with any of the other cameras that I have, even if those images aren't as beautiful or as aesthetic as some of the other images in my portfolio. And once I came to this realization that not every photo has to be a perfect visual masterpiece, I started to see the beauty in the photos that I captured on that trip. And truthfully, they are great photos, not because they're compositionally perfect or the light was really nice and dynamic or the tones were dialed in. They certainly were not, but because they accurately depict this road trip that I went on with my buddy and his family in a beautiful place that I've always wanted to visit. They depict a time in my life that I would really love to remember, and I can also share these images with him and his family, and I think that's definitely something special. Now, these aren't necessarily shots that I would want to share on social media, but I think that's the point. For so long, everything that I shot was focused around Instagram in particular. And that led me down this dark path of pretty much hating any photo that I captured that wasn't, quote, Insta-worthy, or I didn't feel like it fit my grid. And to be honest, it made me dislike a lot of my work, and I was constantly comparing myself, and it led me down this journey of just not shooting as much as I used to. I think the more we dive into photography as an art form, the more we start to neglect the original purpose of photography, and that is documentation. Documenting the things that are happening around us, the day-to-day scenes that might seem ordinary but still represent a significant part of our lives. And looking back at these photos, they do just that, even if they are, quote, bad photos. So yes, I absolutely love taking bad photos with this camera, and I will continue to do so in the future. And if you're a photographer and you can relate to what I'm saying, I definitely think this is a good mindset to adopt. While I definitely think it's important to embrace the artistic side of photography, I also think it's important to remember the documentary side of photography and embrace that as well. Because it's just as beautiful, sometimes even more beautiful than a meticulously crafted image. And speaking of bad photos, one of the things I love so much about this camera are the imperfections that arise when shooting JPEGs using the Fuji recipes. So my original idea for this video was to actually do like a walk and talk travel vlog and talk to you guys about some of the Fuji recipes that I was using on that trip to Ireland, similar to my Lisbon vlog. And I do still want to talk about some of the recipes I was using for these images in this video. But before we do so, I just want to address the elephant in the room, and that's the fact that this camera is incredibly difficult to buy right now. It seems to be sold out everywhere, and the only place you can actually get it is secondhand. But luckily, getting your hands on one of these just got a lot easier thanks to the sponsor of today's video, MPB. MPB is the world's largest online platform to buy, sell, and trade photography and videography kit. If you're a photographer or a videographer, you probably have some old gear lying around that you need to sell, maybe in order to upgrade to a new model, or maybe you just need some quick cash. MPB makes the process of selling or trading in your kit hassle-free. With MPB, you simply provide information about your gear's condition, and they provide you with an online quote, oftentimes in an instant. It's a streamlined approach that takes out all the stress of selling your gear online while helping you quickly get rid of your unneeded gear and putting money straight back into your pocket. If you're also in the market to purchase used gear like the Fuji X100v, MPB has you covered as well with a wide selection of different camera brands to choose from. They're an excellent resource for any photographer to use, and I definitely recommend checking them out. Thank you, MPB, for sponsoring this video. Okay, so back to the Fuji recipes. So for 95% of the trip, I was actually shooting with the Kodachrome 64 recipe from Fuji X Weekly. I went for this recipe mainly for the look of the muted greens while still having nice natural looking colors. I knew I was going to be dealing with a lot of strong greens in Ireland, and I've always found greens to be a little bit tricky and sometimes overpowering in an image. So I thought this would kind of help soften things out while still letting the natural beauty of Ireland come to life. I thought the Kodachrome 64 rendered those greens beautifully. It was nice and soft, but it still maintained a good amount of contrast, and it didn't pull out much from other colors in the scene. I felt like we still had really nice natural colors, and it was also nice with skin tones as well. With that said, I did feel like some of the shots were a little bit too flat for my liking, so I just simply upped the contrast a little bit and increased the saturation, and I felt like that led to a much more compelling image. I shot a few photos with this recipe around London as well, and I feel like it's probably one of the best recipes that you can use as just an everyday Fujifilm recipe. You can shoot a ton of different stuff with this, and it's relevant in a lot of different scenarios, and it's definitely one that I'm going to be using a lot of the time because of the fact that it's so versatile. I also shot with an Ilford HP5 recipe that I found online, and I thought it was really nice, especially in high contrast scenes, but when it was in a low contrast scene, I kind of wish that I had a little bit more contrast. So with those images, I also just increased the contrast quite a bit, and I thought those looked really nice. I do think the grain was a little bit harsh in some of the images, so I might turn that down. But generally speaking, I really loved shooting in black and white, especially with the photos of the girls at home. The indoor lighting just wasn't very pleasing, and I think shooting these in black and white just really lets the emotion of the scenes come to life, and I thought it rendered the scenes beautifully, and I'm actually really happy with these photos, and I'm really excited to share them with this family as well. So I did try and shoot with a few other recipes, namely the Eterna recipe and also one of my favorites, which is the summer recipe, but they just looked a little bit too extreme with the landscapes out there, and I just didn't really like the way that they looked. Later on in the trip, I did visit France and Copenhagen, and I shot with that summer recipe that I used in the Lisbon video, and I absolutely love this recipe, but it's very situational. I think it works perfectly in European cities on summer days. It's something about the white and beige buildings set against the blue sky that just really lets this profile come to life. It puts so much color into those highlights and into those shadows, and it just looks amazing. But I actually think it looks best in hard light. So if you're shooting like during the day, in the middle of the day, I think that's when it looks best. And that's because it does a really good job at softening out those high contrast scenes and adding color into the shadows and the highlights. But if you're shooting in a low contrast scene, I think this recipe is just a little bit much, and it's a little bit hazy for low contrast scenes. So I would definitely recommend keeping this to bright sunny days, specifically in a European city, but I'm sure it would look good in a lot of other places as well. But building off of this, I think it's really important to kind of experiment with different recipes. Just get lost in it, try a bunch of new ones, and just really engage with the creative side of photography. One of the beautiful things about this camera, or any Fuji for that matter, is just how much experimenting you can do with these Fujifilm recipes. There's thousands of different recipe variations that you can choose from, and every time you change it, it honestly feels like you're shooting on a different camera each time. And even if you're trying out a new recipe and it's not perfect and you wish that you had shot that scene on another recipe, just remember what I said earlier in this video about imperfections make photography what it is, and as long as you're documenting that moment and depicting it in a realistic way, I think it's still a beautiful photograph if it represents something in your life that you would like to remember. But of course, I'd like to hear from you guys. I've talked about a few different things in this video, and I'm curious to hear if you can relate to anything I've said throughout this video earlier on about documenting our lives and why this camera is so good at it, or maybe you're feeling a little bit discouraged by your work anything like that, leave a comment down below and let's have a discussion. If you guys want to see more of me shooting with this camera, I definitely recommend checking out my Lisbon video if you haven't seen that yet. I capture a ton of photos with that summer recipe, and those are actually images that fulfilled both of my desires. Beautiful artistic images and images that depicted a city that I spent a lot of time in and that I really enjoyed myself in. And I think that's the ultimate goal for photography, is beauty and documentation in one image. And I feel like I definitely did that in that Lisbon video. I'm planning on creating a lot more Fuji content on the channel here soon, guys, and I would love to hear any video ideas that you might want to see, anything you'd like me to talk about. Go ahead and leave a comment down below and I will definitely take those into consideration. But that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next week.